That's a sign that you just live in a sick society.
Well, okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you'll never turn on the news and have the news tell you that 6,999,999,000 people were really nice to each other today and opened the door for each other and said please and thank you. But that's what happens all over the planet every day. But they're not going to put it on the news. They're not going to put it on the news because that's not what kicks in the stress chemicals that gets people to keep watching the news and thinking that's the only place they're going to get the truth.
You're correct on all that, and I understand that, but how old are you?
65. One of the things that I get to in my book, because like I said, one of the largest determinants of what our future is going to be is what our vision of possibility is, what we think the world is right now. And one of the big misconceptions, and I think it goes right to the heart of a lot of stuff we're talking about with media manipulation. One of the biggest things is that, and I do a lot of public presentations, so I always mention this because my job is stress management. So I go into a corporation or a hospital or whatever, and my job is to teach people stress management tools. And so one of the things that I started talking about was the fact that violent crime rates are at 40-year lows, and I have the data in my book. I have a graph in the new second edition of the Gospel of Science, and it shows that violent crime rates have been dropping. And you get these little bumps, but they're still down here at 40-year lows. And the reason that that's really important to bring home to people is because we're led to believe by media, because what mainstream or corporate media realize is they realize that if they get us angry or upset or frightened, it releases stress chemicals, biochemical stress triggers. And what happens is we get addicted to those chemicals. And so we start coming back for more viewership. Yeah, and so that's why the media is always shocking and frightening.
If it leads, baby.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, and there's research in this. I have it all. All the science is meticulously cited at the end in my book. But so they've got people thinking that violent crime is going through the roof when it's really at 40-year lows, not just in the United States, but in many countries around the world. And so what should happen when we have less violent, radically less violent crime? We should have less prisons, but we don't. We imprison more of our people than any country on the planet, and it's that fear. It's that fear.
That's a sign that you just live in a sick society.
Well, okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind.
I think it's been a number of years, but that's okay. A lot of people don't like coming down here in the middle of the night. Which maybe you can understand.
I'm a night owl, yeah. So
are you? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Bill Douglas is here. What's the name of your organization, Bill?
The Global Transformation Project.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, that's what we think.
Because the globe is transforming whether you want it to or not.
Right. Yeah, and in fact, we're forming it with our consciousness. There was a major study that involved thousands of people, and what they found was the biggest determinant of their future well-being was their vision of the future. And so we're actually creating...
Mind is the builder.
Yeah.
That's a sign that you just live in a sick society.
Well, okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind, everything starts in the human mind.
Yeah, and it's not like there's just an organic process going on. I mean, there's people who have elite power and control who would like to shape consciousness for their own purposes and their own goals, right?
Yeah, well, that's happening constantly with media and, public, the way that we're educated.
And that's not new either. I'm sure that's been going on since the first priest came up with the first secret ritual.
I think it's
on
always,
top of a pyramid thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I think it's always becoming more and more highly refined. And the intensity of media propaganda has just amped up magnificently over the last couple of years at least.
It's become more divisive than I've ever noticed in my life, because society is kind of falling apart like that.
Well, what do we...
The fact if you want to feel like things are utopian and...
No, hold on.
For you, pal. You have a good one.
Yeah, you too. I'm not saying we live in a utopian world. There is crime. There is crime. There always will be. For humanity, there's always going to be somebody that's going to...
Bill, I'm going to have to apologize. I'm usually kind of negative and cynical on the program. You're bringing a level of optimism and a fresh breath of air. You're saying there are solutions. These people don't want to hear about solutions at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, we don't want to... That's not what we do down here.
Let me throw this out there. I mean, the powers that be like us thinking that everybody around us is dangerous. Because then we support putting more and more people in prison, and we support the prison industrial complex. I mean, we get played. And, what do we base this idea that the world is just so incredibly violent on? Because I don't see it. When I walk down the street, and I've worked everywhere. I've worked in Watts Compton. I've worked in East LA. I've worked all over the place. And I've never seen this. I see it in movies, and I see it on TV, and I used to see it on those horrible cop shows, where they were always dragging black people out of their house in their underwear. And, we're talking about a constructed reality here. This idea just because somebody got their tires stolen or something happened, that all of a sudden that means that violent crime rates are dropping. I don't buy that. I mean, it's not just in the United States. It's in various countries. Now, I grew up in the 60s, and we weren't people that called the cops every time something happened. I guarantee it. A lot of people, used PIG when they were talking about cops. We're not living in some, new place. No, violent crime rates are at 40-year lows. I can show you the data, and it's not just the United States, it's other countries around the world. Now, what's interesting is over the last 40 years that violent crime rates have been dropping precipitously. That's the same time that mind-body practices have spread across the planet like a wildfire. And that wildfire was really ignited by the Beatles when they went to study meditation with the Maharishi in India. It was on television. They were on TV all over the planet, and kids like me all over the planet were looking at that. And I think
that was a way that you kind of grounded this whole psychedelic movement that was very much so a corporate movement. It became so in the 60s, where that's why hippies are something that we can readily identify because there was a certain style of dress. There were things that you could sell them and market to them. And it became another way for Madison Avenue or whoever to make their money. Yeah. But then the Beatles do go to India and do have this kind of spiritual awakening. I bet that did have and played a role.
It did. It had a huge impact. And George Harrison, in an interview, he said, he said we were just 4 working class British kids that all of a sudden had more money than, we could ever dream of. We could buy any physical pleasure that we wanted. And he said, we just weren't happy. And so we ended up going to India, to delve into our consciousness. But
it's not just the video games, Calvin. It's the desensitization from violence is in many aspects of our society.
Well, but what I'm talking about is changing the program so that these things won't have that impact on people, because everything starts in human consciousness. And what we know is that if we were teaching school kids how to go into that alpha theta brainwave state, for an hour a day, every day, for 12 years, it actually shrinks the stress and fear part of their brain, and it increases the empathy and compassion parts of their brain. And so you're talking about a kid that has a completely different wired brain by the time he gets old enough to go buy a semi-automatic weapon. And, that's where everything changes. I mean, if you want to get down to the root, it's consciousness. And we have these scientifically proven technologies that we could be exposing all the school children to that would not only make them smarter and better readers, better at math, more verbally eloquent, all these things. It's all scientifically proven. And then it would also be boosting their immune system, and after the pandemic that we went through, my God, wouldn't it be great to be boosting every kid's T-cell count? There was a Tai Chi study at UCLA, and they were checking people's T-cell counts, and so they had a control group and a Tai Chi group, and at the end of the study, I think it was 12 weeks, the Tai Chi group had 50% more T-cells. And what the science shows coming out of COVID was that the healthcare workers that had higher T-cell counts were much less likely to get COVID, and also they suffered much less from it if they got it, if their T cell count was high. So we know how to actually boost kids' T cells by count by 50%. So it's just insane that we're not doing this in schools, because it could avert a lot of these violence problems in schools, because the schools that do it have already seen that. The schools that have Mind Body, they've already seen a reduction in violence. Prisons that have done it have already seen a reduction in violence. So this is all scientifically proven, and this wouldn't be hard to do. It'd be easy to start teaching kids how to do this stuff for 1 hour.
931-5534, that's 931 KKFI. Good morning, you're on the radio.
Hey, good morning, this is Bill from KC. How you guys doing?
What's up, Bill?
Good, how you doing?
I'm good. Hey, I have a couple questions for your guests. I've been listening all night, and so I guess I'm trying to understand. So you think most of the problems facing our society and the world can be changed through yoga, correct?
Well, mind-body exercises so that make these brainwave changes. So it's yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, and mindfulness. Those are the ones that have like a huge amount of science behind them.
Okay. Because you cited research, what specific research? You said that research shows, and there's a lot of research, and I'm very involved in the fitness community. I don't do yoga. I used to, because for my own personal reasons. A lot of good-looking women do yoga as well. It's a great way to meet people. But there's a lot of junk science in the fitness industry and stuff like you're talking about, where people are just trying to sell you stuff like oils. I mean, I've heard a lot about yoga and CBD and stuff like that, which I'm pretty skeptical of. So how do you prove this exactly?
Okay.
What's your research that you're citing?
Yeah, well, okay, I have a 700-page book called The New Second Edition of the Gospel of Science, and it has all this science that I'm talking about, and it also it's endnoted, so you can go right to the links, and I have a webpage where you can go to the live links. And
how could he find that?
Oh,
do you have a website?
Amazon or any bookseller, yeah.
A bookseller is not Amazon. No.
Yeah, I know. Amazon is like a weird thing for people that have small businesses or books. It's like you have to deal with them, even though you despise the business model. So,
but how could people find your book? How could people?
If you just do a Google search for New Second Edition Gospel of Science, some bookseller will come up to the top that'll have it, because it's available worldwide. And so now. What was it you were talking about just before? Because I had a comment to that. I'm sorry, when you asked me about where to get the book, I lost track.
Junk information.
Oh yes, the science. Okay, the science. Okay, so a lot of the studies in the book, if you get the book and you look at it, they're National Institute of Health Studies, NIH studies, so those are high-level studies. They're from other universities around the planet. From Princeton I do several sections on science done at Princeton University, the PARA labs, the Princeton Engineering and Anomalies Research Labs. Some of the research that I talk about in the book is from the Institute of Noetic Sciences that was started by astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and they do some incredible science on human consciousness and the abilities of human consciousness. And so I spent 40 years putting this together, and I was very conscious about finding solid scientific research. And the thing is that when you go through the book, what you start to find is that the science is validated in so many different studies from so many different angles that it's impossible. It's impossible to. And the other thing too is it's like I've been doing mind-body stuff for 40 years, and one thing that I know, and I organize a world event called World Tai Chi Day that I mentioned earlier. It actually changed global consciousness. But so I interact with many mind-body teachers, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, meditation, or whatever, and we all know that these changes that the science in my book talks about, we all see these things happening in our lives. Everybody that knows us knows that we're way easier to get along with than we were before we started doing this stuff. And so then when you see the science that shows that it makes the empathy and compassion part of your brain bigger, that makes absolute sense, because all of our friends and all of our family tell us, wow, you're so much nicer than you used to be. So, you know what I mean? So you get this validation. And so I have solid science in the book, and then I also have 40 years of life experience that shows me this stuff is true. And, in the prisons that use this and the schools that use this, they're seeing the results. It's an ironclad case. It's not an iffy case. The reason you don't hear about it is because it's not going to make anybody $1 billion a year. You know, this is a very simple, elegant solution to so many of humanity's problems, social and economic. But you're not going to hear about it. You're not going to hear about it on the news. But people are practicing this stuff all over the planet, and they're having, massive benefits in their lives. And we're seeing, violent crime rates at 40-year lows in the United States and many countries around the world. So something huge is happening. But like Gil Scott-Heron said, you ain't going to see, it ain't going to be televised. It's just not.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate your time and your answer. And one more time before I get off, because I'm going to Google this in. It's called the New...
Yeah, New Second Edition, The Gospel of Science.
Gospel of Science.
Yeah, because gospel
so
means good news. Gospel means good news, so it's good. The good news of science. The New Second Edition, The Gospel of Science.
Thanks for your phone call, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Nice talking to you.
Right back after this. This is the Paragon Radio program.
What I did was I took all this medical research that I'd gotten from these doctors, and then Google came along, and so I was getting much more. And, things that could benefit like hundreds of millions of people just in our country, just in the United States. And I started sending this to media all over the world. This is before before the idea of World Tai Chi Day. And I was stunned because the media was not the least bit interested.
It's like they're stuck in their brain. And what the science shows is that mind-body practices, they reduce that part of the brain that automatically rejects new information. Now, it doesn't mean that you're gullible and that you accept everything. It just means that you don't auto-reject. Your brain goes into a mode where it's willing to take information in and then make sense of that information before it rejects or accepts it. And so this would be a huge thing to be teaching kids all over the planet, is how to think in a coherent way where they can actually take in new information. Well, kinds of aspects of our being and consciousness are really profound, but one of the things that they found is that when people practice regular meditation, it actually shrinks the stress and fear part of their brain, and it increases the size of the empathy and compassion parts of their brain. And so what you see in schools that employ mind-body practices, because some schools have already done it, is you see a dramatic reduction in bullying rates. And what got me thinking down these lines was I did a presentation at Folsom Prison many years ago, and they brought me in to teach meditation and Tai Chi to the inmates, and I didn't realize it at the time, but they had a program there for 2 years, a meditation program, a Tai Chi Cha program, and they not only had they brought down the violent incident rates for the participants in the group, but there was a reduction in violent incident rates for the whole prison. And the whole prison wasn't participating in this mind-body practice. And then other prisons, like Apodaca Prison in Mexico, they had a horrifically historic violent incident at their prison, and then they just taught the whole prison how to meditate, and they haven't had a major violent incident from it since then. And so if we were teaching these mind-body practices in public education in age-appropriate ways from kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, what we're suggesting is 1 hour a day, so it'd be kind of like a mind-body health science PE course, because Tai Chi and yoga give you all the benefits of exercise, but you'd be getting the mind-body benefits as well, so you'd be increasing your empathy and compassion part of your brain. And so just a little change in the brain waves, and these effects last, so it doesn't just make you less violent or kinder when you're doing the meditation, but it actually starts to change your brain, like I said. And so these students would have changed brains. They would have more socially functional brains and more compassionate and empathetic brains, more normal brains, really, because when you get into the science, compassion is a normal state for human beings. You see that in the science. And so, we could be imparting these ancient, time-tested, and science-proven technologies, mental technologies, to students all over the planet, and it wouldn't cost very much. And just a little change in these students' brains would make the difference between them deciding when they get up in the morning if they're going to go out and, have some fun with their friends, or whether they're going to pack a backpack full of extra ammo and go blow up a school. It only takes a tiny little change in consciousness to make that change. So we could dramatically reduce these kind of things.
So the solution is within you.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the problems of our world, the society we live in. The solutions are spiritual.
Well, they're scientific. It's consciousness science, because the verbiage is really important because we're going to get this into public schools. And so we have to, make sure that we use the proper description, because the way that I approach it is from just a science-based. Now, I've studied mind.
You don't want to muddy it with it having like a religious overtone, is that?
Yes, that's correct, and it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to, because there's mind-body practices that are taught that aren't taught in a religious way, and they have that effect. They have that effect
Sure.
on people.
Yeah. Well, as I was writing, finishing the new second edition of the Gospel of Science, so that it could come out on January 1st, 2022, was, I had referred to Dr. Emoto's work in the first edition, but then as I was going through the process, I found, other supporting research that I had mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Massive international studies that backed up that human consciousness affects the crystallization of water. So it supported Dr. Emoto's work. But as I was going through this and doing the research, I realized there were a lot of attack pieces on the internet of Dr. Emoto. And that disturbed me greatly. So what I began to realize was that there's like this whole kind of block of media. Wikipedia seems to be part of it a lot of times, but there's other media sources that have this real kind of mechanistic view of the world and science, which really doesn't fit into a quantum physics world. It's kind of outdated, but they hang on to it with a death grip, and they attack anybody who talks about, consciousness affecting physical matter, which, in a quantum world, this would be a normal thing to study, to look at. And the data is out there, to show that this is a very real thing. Consciousness affects matter. It affects other people's consciousness. This is all done science. But I had, as I was finishing the book, I was talking about it a lot in my Tai Chi classes locally. And I had a couple of students that were in the class that had been in there for years. And I was shocked because they stopped me after class. And one of them said, "You have to stop talking about this consciousness affecting matter research." And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, "Well, it's not real." What I eventually figured out was they were getting all their science off Wikipedia. And, I don't know why Wikipedia does this, but they do it. And they've ruined some really good scientists. They've really done some disservices to some really good scientists. And so I ended up writing like a whole section in the book about this issue, because the thing is you can give people a whole book of science, like this new second edition of Gospel of Science. But, if they go on Wikipedia and they say, "Oh, there's something in there that you shouldn't pay attention to," or whatever,
they'll just jump on that, won't they?
Just put it off. Yeah. So I was compelled to write this whole section, based on Dr. Emoto's experience, because he was treated so unfairly in the media. You'll see in the book if you have probably seen it already.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, how do we manage that? I mean, we're always going to be challenged, there's always going to be that. And it's how we integrate what it is we're doing in a way that sort of piques curiosity in other people. Like, well, why I'm not making this up. So you've got your coming in, but I've got this. Is there somewhere where we could be curious about each other's processes and have a kind of dialogue about this? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's where we should be headed. And I believe we will get there. Yeah, it's going to take time. But I had to address this issue because otherwise people, they get played by a game that they don't understand the game. And so I had to point out, okay, there's a game being played here. And it's not a healthy scientific game, because science, the very concept of science is that you're open. If you have a phenomenon, you try to figure out what that phenomenon is and what made it happen. You don't just say, "Oh, that's not real, so we can't study it." That's bizarre, and it's unscientific in the extreme. So where do we want to go? Well, we want to be open. We want to look at all this. And so what I try to do with the book, again, the new second edition, it's very important that you remember new second edition of the Gospel of Science, is that it's, hundreds of pages of science, but it's told in a story form. So it's not,
okay. I was going to say, might be a bit much for some of us, but I think it's important that you've got it in there, because it means it's a go-to place, and it's all like cross-reference, and you've got the links and everything. So it's like, you're not making this up. You've collated it, you've brought it all into one place, which is really good.
And that's exactly why I did that, so that people would have a go-to source. They could see the science. Once you see the science, you know that consciousness affects global consciousness, and you know that consciousness can affect the physicality of.
So what do you think the block is then? Do you think it's like is it the external internal thing where I don't know? I'm just getting a feeling for why is it blocked by some people and others are open.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is, and this is true throughout history, and that is that any way of looking at the world that empowers the individual tends to be frowned on by the powers that be, in any age.
You said it.
And then what happened was towards the end of the pandemic, I got really sucked into watching mainstream news. I was just sitting in front of my TV, because, we had a shutdown. I didn't have classes or anything.
Yeah.
And so I was doing what a lot of people were doing. And I was just watching the news, and it was just increasingly screeching and fear-based and, and divisive, just dividing people in so many ways and frightening people. And I just got to a point where I had an epiphany and I said, that's it, I'm done. And I did exactly the same thing 20 years ago when after I had that extraordinary consciousness experience, I turned off the TV, stopped taking the newspaper. I just walked away from all the things, man. I just immersed myself in quantum or alpha state consciousness. That's all I did. Going for walks, sitting by the beach or whatever. And when they were involved in altruistic pleasures, so they're both getting the same mental high, but the DNA knew the difference. When they're involved in altruistic pleasures, there was a healing effect on the DNA. So this compassion is there at very core. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is Charles Darwin, because here in Kansas City, we have probably the best World War I museum in the world. It's spectacular. If you ever come to Kansas City, you have to see it. And it's very moving. And at the very beginning of the museum, they have Charles Darwin's book. And they talk about how that book contributed to the beginning of World War I, the idea of survival of the fittest. And I don't think Darwin actually said that, but, that was the concept that he was, kind of credited with. And it was a misinterpretation of Darwin, of his view, because his next book that came out, it didn't mention survival of the fittest or the concept, maybe a couple of times. But what the book was filled with was the idea of compassion and love. And what he was saying was that it was humanity's desire to connect and to support other human beings. That's what elevated humanity to their status, to our status on the planet. It was love. It was compassion. And so you see that in our DNA. That was Darwin's perception of it. And people don't talk about that, unfortunately. Some of the most beautiful things that, famous people say, we never hear about. We just hear the coined phrases and stuff like that. And so what I show in the book is that compassion is woven into every aspect of humanity. And in fact, even into our economics. And I quote Utah and Florida, they started projects where they just gave homeless people homes to live in, safe, warm places with running water, bathrooms, where maybe they could cook. They just gave them that. If they saw them on the street, the policeman took them to the place, they processed them, gave them somewhere to live, warm out of the cold. And what they found was that in Florida and Utah, where they did this, it was a county in Florida, it was the state of Utah, I believe. It's all in the book. It's all sourced in the book. But what they found was that they saved between $12,000 and $21,000 per homeless person for just giving them a place to stay. Wow. So they didn't have to have the police rousting them to go from one place to another all night long. It's
like it's joined up thinking, isn't it? And so Bill Douglas is here with us on She Time, and if you want to find out more about what he's talking about, his amazing second edition of his book, The Gospel of Science, then head over to the globaltransformationproject.org.
All of these things that you've talked about, you have delineated so well. I'm so very excited, that you were able to talk about this stuff, because I know it to be, but the way that you set it out there and the way that you write, that's going to be a wonderful thing. And I certainly want to help get it in the hands of as many people as possible.
Sounds like you've got these down built to a science. That is amazing. But simple techniques can just change your life. But you've said that just a few brain-changing techniques could cause a change of the world, basically, a vast drop in violence. How could that happen?
Well, when I did that Folsom Prison presentation, and I found out that they had changed the behavior of the whole prison.
So I love what you're doing, and I know Benjamin's probably pulling his hair out because he gets all these callers, and it's amazing how many of them attack each other.
Well, there's some amazing science. You really brought something up that is really fascinating. And I was talking about the Princeton University Global Consciousness Project, where they had computers all over the planet, and they could see when people's consciousness would affect their computers. And Roger Nelson, he was the director of that project, and he directed it for, I think, 20 years. And anyway, he said that the most exciting thing that they found in that 20 years of research was that, so like the event that we organized, World Tai Chi Day, that was, it fell into a category that they called healing and compassion events. So that included World Yoga Day, World Tai Chi Day, World Peace Day, World Meditation Day, all these different things. And he said what they found over that 20 years of research was that, yes, when people were in states of fear or sorrow or panic, like Princess Diana's death or the September 11th tragedy, it did. It sent their computers off track because, billions of people around the planet were glued to their televisions. They were all in coherent, the same consciousness state. So it did affect their computers. But what they found was that when people held events, mass like meditation events or healing or compassion events around the planet, and that included like peace protests, they studied those as well. What they found was that those events that involved much smaller numbers of people actually affected the global consciousness more powerfully than the fear and tragedy events did. So that bodes really well for the future of humanity because the way that Roger Nelson from Princeton put it was that shows that our compassion mind state is actually, that's when our consciousness is most powerfully affecting the global psyche or the global consciousness. So that really bodes well for the future of the planet. And then what they did, I was mentioning the DNA. There's a study, and all this is in my book. All this research is in my book. But they did a study, and they looked at people's DNA expression. And what they did was they had them perform selfish hedonistic pleasures, and they looked at their DNA, and then they had them perform altruistic pleasures, where you're serving the public good, but you don't expect any response from it. And they both described similar highs. They both, had kind of an uplifting experience from it, whether it was selfish or whether it was altruistic. But the DNA knew the difference. And when they were involved in altruistic pleasures, where they were helping the greater good for no personal gain, their DNA expressed itself more healthfully. There was less inflammation. When they got their high from selfish pleasures, their DNA had more inflammation. It degraded. And, and what's fascinating about this stuff is this is the stuff that's been passed down through the ages. It's like every major religion. I'm not talking about organized religion. They all get corrupted and bent and twisted. But the original prophets of all these religions had very similar ideas, and it was compassion. Compassion was at the core of everything. And all the major religions, they said that when you're serving others, that's when you're the happiest. But what science is now showing us is not only is that when you're the happiest, but it's when your DNA is expressing in the most healthful way. So everything, when you look at the science, and I have this all through my book, and it's all cited, so you can go to the original science. But what it shows again and again is that compassion is woven into the fabric of the universe, and we get lost now.
What you're willing to choose to focus on, because what you focus on expands. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to be focusing on, I need the outside world to tell me what is right, as opposed to the connection within, as you say, the divine connection that is this sort of internal compass of just sense and feeling. They said truth and compassion again, isn't it? If something doesn't chime right, it's not right. Mm-hmm. And it is that call to personal responsibility about health now as well. Mm-hmm. And as we were saying earlier, it's like that the whole healthcare, the preventative healthcare. Again, this would be great if it was part of public education, like how to take care of yourself properly. Just how to cook and how to clean, but also how to which is what you're doing with the Global Transformation Project, encouraging the youngsters to come into that, almost that defragging of all the mind funk. We got so over distracted. There's so much going on, and you just need that kind of people do defrag their computers. So surely your internal computer needs that as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, there's no more powerful thing that we could do, as like a global movement of people that want a better planet, than to facilitate children, public school children all over the planet learning how to access that alpha state. Because when you go into, if anybody out there is regular meditators, you know what I'm talking about. But if you're not, if you're a sporadic meditator or whatever, just get a calendar and just force yourself to, meditate 20, 30 minutes every day. And you'll start to see that when you go into that state, that's where you feel good. That's where you feel safe. That's the place where you can go to get this, this whole kind of rebooting of your computer, like you were talking about. And the science is all there. It shows. It makes us smarter. It makes us kinder. It makes us more compassionate. It makes us more creative. It makes us multi-dimensional thinkers that can solve problems in much more elegant and less fragmented ways. This is all science. It's all backed up by science. And so, when I created the globaltransformationproject.org website, I put the end notes of all this science from the book in that website with live links so that people would have instant access, so that they would be authorities on this science. And they would also understand how the so-called debunkers try to make you feel stupid when you quote this science. And so for people to find their own dignity, and that's what happens when you go into the meditative state as well. You lose that feeling that your worth depends on what people out there have to say about you, because that's not your worth. When we go into these states, when we connect with the ocean of existence, which is what happens when we go into these states, these alpha states, not only do we get all these benefits, but we remember that we're much bigger, much larger than the way that we're defined by the world around us. And that's an important thing for us as we go forward as human beings at all levels of our lives. And like you keep saying, we have to tune into what feels congruent with us, because at our very core, it's compassion. Compassion is the very foundation of the universe. I mentioned an unpublished study from the Paralabs at Princeton that one of the researchers talked about. His name escapes me, Adam Curry. He was there in Paris at the time. And anyway, what they did was they put a random event generator controlled light in the center of a room. It was a grow light, and in a dark room. And so that was the only light source. And so it was random event generator controlled. So it should have ended up in each corner 25% of the times. There was 4 corners in the room. And but they put a living plant in one corner of the room. And what they found was this random event generator light spent a lot more time shining over in the corner of the room where there was life. And so this compassion, this nurturing, when we tune into our source, we know in every fiber, every DNA strand of our being, because I talked about that science earlier, when we're on the right track. And the right track is always compassion. It's always compassionate solutions, because that's what the universe is made of. And so as this science becomes more available, and the way that happens is we spread it. We all spread it, right? Because you can't depend on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News and BBC.
They're not
gonna do it. Yeah, they're all involved in fear-based media, and there's reasons. It gets more viewers. It's all scientific. It creates stress chemicals. It gets us to habitually watch because we get addicted to stress chemicals. I get into all this in the book. And but we can rise above that. Every time we go into these coherent states, it's an act of global evolution, because we're not just affecting ourselves. We're joining with hundreds of millions of people around the planet that are going into these states as well. are not solid and impenetrable mass, but we are open and permeable. So the chi, or life energy, can flow through us just as easily as it flows through the air around us. In fact, the only thing that can limit the flow of chi is a thought limitation. So when I invoke the image of a soothing flow of light or relaxing energy flowing down through your head and brain and face, you may think to yourself, this skull is solid mass, so that energy can't flow through it. Then your tiny cranial muscles will tighten up a little bit, and you will limit the flow of energy and its healing benefits. Therefore, just sit back and enjoy the following sitting Qigong exercise without worrying about how to do it, because the Qi will flow through you easily and effortlessly, just by your willingness to let go. As we begin this exercise, I will use the term light when referring to the Qi, or life energy. This concept connotes permeability, like when sitting outside on a nice fall day and the warm sun seems to flow right through your skin and sink right into your bones. So this doesn't necessarily mean an optical light, but more of a soothing silken energy that may feel light and airy. Begin with your feet flat on the floor and your hands palm down, comfortable on your lap. Let your eyes close easily and naturally. Notice how your lungs fill and empty, becoming aware of your breath. Notice how the bottom of the lungs fills as the abdomen slightly expands, and then fill the lungs to the top as the chest expands out slightly. As you release the breath, observe how the upper chest relaxes in, and then the abdominal wall relaxes in as the lungs completely and effortlessly expel. This full diaphragmatic breathing is used in Tai Chi as well as the sitting Qigong exercises. When releasing the breath, think of allowing all the muscles to let go through the head, face, neck, and shoulders, chest, and back. Allow the shoulders to drop, relaxing away from the neck. As we breathe and let go, notice how the breaths become not only deeper, but at the same time more and more effortless, almost as if the breath were beginning to breathe us. In breathing and releasing, the body begins to expand open as if the very atoms were expanding away from one another, which they actually are. It's just the opposite of when we get tense or tight. We get smaller and a little bit shorter. As we breathe and open, the atoms actually expand away from one another. It's as if the wind could blow right through you. Don't feel as though you have to sit perfectly still through this exercise. Yawn as often as you like, and if you need to fidget or scratch an itch, then do so. However, keep your eyes closed because we will go through layers of awareness, and each time you open your eyes, it will take you back a bit. Again, take nice full breaths and let the whole body relax the breaths out, as if the bones themselves could let go. Now think of the sun directly above your head, and just by thinking of it, you may experience a subtle lift or a lightening throughout your body, as if we rise to a higher, more subtle vibratory rate of this silken, lighted awareness. Let go of trying to feel or make. Just sit back, breathe, and let go, observing effortless responses. Now think of the sun above the head opening and releasing a shower of clear silken light pouring over your head, torso, arms, legs, through your feet, and right down into the earth below. Once you think the thought, let go of it. Let all your cranial muscles let go and simply enjoy the experience of release as you are washed through by this cleansing light. Be aware of it expanding through the muscles in the top of the head. As they fill with lightness, they begin to relax and release their grip on the skull, expanding down through the sides and the back of the head until the entire scalp is lighted. Every follicle filled with light, flowing out through every hair on the head until the root of every hair is floating in a pool of liquid effortlessness. Experience as the scalp relaxes on the skull and the light permeates. And now expanding down into the back of the head, into those muscle groups at the base of the skull. As those muscles fill with light, they begin to release their grip on the bones in the back of the neck and the shoulders and the upper back, up through the back and sides of the head. The hinges of the jaw begin to light as the deep skeletal muscles let go. Now over the forehead, across the brow, and down the bridge of the nose.
not trying to feel or make anything happen, but sitting back and effortlessly observing as the soothing energy expands into the left eye socket, and now into the right eye socket. All the tiny optical muscles letting go and floating effortlessly in the expanding radiance. The nose, cheeks, mouth, and lips open to the lightness as it flows up through the nose into the deepest recesses of the sinus cavities, where you can experience an effortless release as the sinuses fill with light. Now the ears and the sides of the head, the tiny bones and muscles of the inner ears releasing as the light permeates, allowing the eustachian tubes to open, energy flowing down into the mouth. As the mouth fills with light, the upper palate, gums, and even the teeth seem to light. The tongue and the lower jaw, the gums and teeth from one side all the way around to the other. Now, any saliva gathered in your mouth, swallow it and experience the energy moving down through the neck and throat to expand throughout the chest. The heart itself begins to illuminate. Again, if you catch yourself trying to make or feel something happen, let all that go. Sit back and be willing to feel absolutely nothing as you passively observe the lightness expanding through the heart and chest, lighting all the fibrous tissue of the lungs. Every breath we breathe in breathes lighted oxygen, carried with every beat of the heart to all the extremities. In fact, every cell is lighted as it's carried through all the liquid systems of the body, leaving every cell radiant with a silken effortlessness. Expanding now through all the organs, lighting the stomach, the liver, spleen and intestinal tract, down through the kidneys and the lower back. Now think of the sun above your head for a moment, opening and releasing an even greater flow of light, pouring over and through you into the earth. Again, once you think the thought, let go of it, and then open to an experience of expanded release as the bones themselves open to a cleansing shower. As the skull is permeated, the light expands into the billions of brain cells, lighting the left frontal lobe of the brain, and then the right. Expanding through the midbrain and temporal lobes, and on into the brain stem or the old brain in the back. It's as if the brain were a muscle that we've clenched for a long, long time. And as we let go and allow the light to permeate the cells, it's as if that muscle is finally letting go, opening and lighting. Effortless and soothing, releasing any straining thoughts into the silken, cleansing expanse of lightness. Now allow the energy to flow down the spine throughout the entire nervous system, to the furthest dendrites in the skin. Release any nervous tension in the frayed nerve endings into the cleansing effortlessness of that expanding light. As it expands around to the solar plexus and the nerve bundle there, the highest concentration of nerves outside of the brain itself, so any of the nervous tension that we hold in the abdominal or stomach area can be released into this expanding lightness. As it moves down to the very tip of the tailbone where it radiates out, filling the pelvic bowl, legs, feet, and pouring right on down through the open feet into the cleansing earth. So this is a very effortless process as we allow the light to pour over us from above and allow the earth to draw any loads right out through our open feet in its gentle pull of gravity. All we need to do is simply breathe, open, and be willing to let go. As we allow this cleansing shower to pour through us, you may become aware of blocks in the flow. These blocks can manifest themselves in many forms, such as muscle tension, tightness, aches, angst, or feelings of anxiety. Basically, any form of discomfort or dis-ease is a signal of blocked energy. Therefore, you don't want to try not to feel these blocks or repress them in any way. Actually, let yourself be right in the center of those feelings. Feel how they feel and where you feel them. Then, with the next deep releasing exhale, think of letting the light expand right in the center of the block, and then just sit back to experience as it begins to effortlessly open and release its loads into the cleansing shower of light pouring through us. With each deep releasing breath, the mind, body, and heart can let go at even deeper levels. Yes, the heart is a muscle, and as you relax out a sigh or yawn, the heart can begin to let go of emotions you may have repressed or held onto. Think of the brain, mind, and cranial muscles letting go as you release the breath. As we allow the heart and the brain to open and let go, the cleansing shower can begin to wash loads we've squeezed in the mind and heart. We can begin to let go of fears, tensions, and worries that we've squeezed in the tissue. As always, the more you let go, the more you can let go. Think of the downpour from above intensifying 10 times over, and then sit back and observe the responses. Let the feet open even more for elimination. Release any remaining loads into the cleansing shower. Now think of the feet closing, and instantly that happens. Immediately you may begin to experience the sensation on the soles of the feet, as a silken cocoon of energy backfills up and over the feet, ankles, calves, thighs, hips, hands, arms, torso, shoulder, neck, and head, until it overspills over the top of your head as the body is saturated with light. As the light continues to flow over and through the body, think of the hands opening. Just by thinking the thought, it happens with no effort, and immediately light begins to pour out through your hands and fingers. With eyes still closed, slowly lift your hands up in front of you as if you were holding a giant beach ball in between them. So your hands are about 3 or 4 feet apart, palm facing palm, as if you were about to clap. Take a couple of deep cleansing breaths and allow the entire body to relax. Even though the hands are still raised, let every muscle in the upper body just let go. Now, with eyes still closed, slowly move your hands in towards one another. Open them to the experience of the energy we've begun to gather, throughout and around ourselves, but also between our hands as well. Move the hands in until they're almost touching, but not quite. Let yourself get a sense of the feeling, and then slowly move them back apart, feeling the difference as they move away from one another, until again they're 3 or 4 feet apart. Take a couple of deep breaths, again letting go of the muscles. Again, slowly move the hands in towards one another, opening them to the sensation of energy until they're almost touching. As you slowly move them apart again, notice the difference in sensation as they move away from one another. Before we do this one last time, take a couple of deep cleansing breaths to again let the entire body relax. The more we relax, the more easily this river of energy pours through our body and arms and out through our open hands. It's a letting experience. We don't have to try. Now one last time, very, very slowly, move the hands in until they're almost touching. Experience. As you slowly move them apart again, experience the difference and gently place them back down on your legs. Now let all that go. With each releasing breath, allow yourself to relax a bit more into your chair with each exhale. By letting all that go, we can now touch back into the shower of light pouring over us from above. As we're saturated with light, it overspills over the top of the head, filling the field around us. until very quickly it seems as though we were literally floating in an ocean of expanding lightness. With each releasing breath, you can allow yourself to expand with this light, and in doing so, continue to release loads and tensions that you may have squeezed in your mind or your body. These loads are effortlessly drawn out magnetically in all directions, like ethereal iron filings being drawn outward from the deepest part of your mind and body, lifted and cleansed as you breathe and let go. You can literally feel loads and burdens beginning to be lifted up and off your shoulders. Again, just by breathing and being willing to let go. Worries and concerns are now lifted off the brow and the temples and seemingly right up out of the brain itself. The deep facial muscles begin to release tensions they've held onto. Now the heart can begin to release any heaviness or angst it's held onto. With each releasing breath, allowing the heart to open even more. Allowing the deepest part of the heart to open, the muscles within and around it, letting go. As we continue to release loads, we can begin to open to the permeant lightness expanding within and throughout us. The more we let go, the lighter we become. There's literally no limit to how much light we can assimilate, save a thought limitation. So wherever we become aware of tension or restriction or tightness in thought or feeling, with each releasing breath, we can allow the lightness to expand within that, allow ourselves to open, to become lighted, effortless. This process of release, expansion, cleansing, and lighting will continue for hours after completing this experience. In fact, the rhythm of your breath and the willingness to let go will continue this effortless release. Opening and lighting. Take a few more deep cleansing breaths as we continue to allow every cell and every aspect of the field within and around us to open, to assimilate this radiant lightness as we actually become light. Being lighted is a natural state. It's the squeezing, the tension, the fears that cuts off the flow, the assimilation, the expanse of our natural state of lightness. So as we breathe and open through these experiences, we become closer to our natural selves, our lightedness, our effortless nature. With each cleansing breath, allowing ourselves to open at deeper levels, to again assimilate light, floating in this ocean of expanding lightness. Every cell, every aspect of us in the field around us becoming radiant, healed. Now, very slowly and very gently, when you're ready, open your eyes.